share my screen. Also, my name is Lay. I am the Community Volunteer Ambassador for the Santa Monica Mountains National Recreation Area. Howdy, everyone. Good afternoon. Doop, doop, doop. All right. So, let me move my window. As a visible disclosure, we'd like to inform any participants that any and all of the Zoom series is and will be recorded. The purpose of this is to provide the Zoom series to those who participated or missed out on the session. It has also provided the information for participants to refer back to. In addition to the visible disclosure, this statement will be orally stated at the beginning of each series, like I am right now. And I'm going to stop sharing and hand it off to Razsa.
All right. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. For those of you who may not know me and are watching it from Cabrillo or other park sites, I work here at the Santa Monica Mountains National Recreation Area, and I've been here since 2008. And if you haven't caught the Critter Corner talk or the first Spider series talk, I just talked briefly about how I grew to love these animals and I grew more curious about them every day. And so I want to just share some of my knowledge and passion about them. And I'm going to share my screen. And hopefully, if you didn't get a chance to see the last Spider series, we did talk about silk and other, and its properties and what they were used for. And let me know if you guys could see the screen.
Yes.
All right, cool. Because I had a little glitch here for a second. And so we'll talk about spider webs, because at the end of that discussion last week, there was a lot of questions about spider webs and identification. So we'll dive a little bit more into that today. But before we start, I just want to let you know that I am not a scientist. I'm not an expert, but I am an enthusiast. I really do appreciate these little guys and gals, and I just like learning about them and looking for them and observing them, just like most people are, like what's their flower finding and bird watching passion. Spiders do vary from taxa and families, and so their web usage and the way they catch prey may differ. So it's really hard and it's challenging for scientists to pinpoint and say, well, that's that type of spider, because it could be any of those things depending on their behavioral or their usage. So a lot of it will be generalization, but because orb weavers are so common, a lot of scientists tend to study them the most, just because they're easier to find and capture and watch them. So a lot of what we're talking about today would be revolving around orb weavers or your garden spiders. If you have any questions, you could use the chat box, and if it's a question Lay could answer, she could answer while we're presenting, or we can hold those questions to the end and I'll answer everything at the end. All right, so just a quick overview of what we're going to go over today. I figured, we're going to be talking about webs. We'll quickly talk about silk, just a recap from last week. We'll talk about web uses and web IDing, how to identify certain webs, and then also web design. So they do their architecture. They really think about how they're going to need these webs and how to construct them. So we know that silk is strong, and the strongest silk spiders produce is a drag line. And compared to like Kevlar and steel, it is, if it's contained the same diameter, it's actually stronger. And that's why scientists are so interested in replicating it and synthesizing the proteins of it for medicinal use or for technology use. So again, scientists are so breakthrough studies on that. And again, these little guys do so much. So before we go in on web making, it's important to understand I do have spirets, and that's how their silk is distributed through their abdomen. Depending on the species, again, it differs. They can have between 2 to 8 spinnerets. And these appendages work like little fingers. Sometimes the majority of spiders do not shoot their silk out. However, we did talk about one specific spider that did do silk. And that was a breakthrough discovery as well when scientists found that out. But the majority of them actually release the silk by placing the liquid down and it solidifies and they'll walk away or pull it out with their appendages there. So it really just depends on how many they need to do what they gotta do. And there's really cool videos where you can actually see them use their little spinnerets to weave, depending on what their needs are. And then again, they use their silk for different vary of thickness and flexibility. And depending on the species, up to 7 different types of silk can be produced. Because we are going to talk about mostly orb weavers today, I think there's 3 specific orb weavers that can produce up to 4 different types of silk. So that just gives you an idea of a range of how many different types of silk they could use in their uses. So we'll go a little bit into web making. So we did talk about it last week, the different web uses. They could use webs for nurseries to hold egg sacs, to bring up the young. They could also use them for shelters. And some of them mostly use them for catching prey. However, not all of them will use a web to catch prey. They'll use other tactics and they'll just use the web for hosting their babies or hosting a home. So it really just depends on the actual spider species. So we'll go over the 5 basic web identifications. There's actually more out there. Again, there's so many spiders, but scientists have narrowed it down to 5 that you could actually identify. And as we go through here, you're gonna be like, oh, I've seen that there and I've seen this here. And so it just gives you a general starting point where to understand what spider that probably is. So for example, we'll start with Charlotte's Web, right? The orb weaver, it's that typical spiral shape. It comes from the family Ariadneae, and so that's also your orb weavers, your garden spiders, and they actually are, the scientists have figured out that they're more cognitive in their architecture. They could actually look into how much space they'll need to construct it. They look into where the anchor points are going to be. They actually plan everything out before they construct it. And then they actually think about, well, I don't know if they think, but they actually take into account how much silk they could produce for this web. So if it's too far, too big, they really take that to account. So that was one thing that they noticed about these spiders. Some orb weavers could actually create an extra, I want to say pattern near the hub, near the center part of the web. And those are called stabilimentum. That is the singular word for it. If we're talking about more than one, the plural would be stabilimenta. And so some orb weavers will create these really specific designs toward the center, and scientists are actually studying that as well as why are they doing that. And orb weavers will actually redo their webs on a daily basis. And so they have a lot of energy to reproduce, and they actually remember patterns and space. So again, they're real good thinkers as far as architecture goes, and they'll actually eat their silk. So whatever part of the web that's damaged, they will go back and eat it up, and they'll recycle the proteins from that silk to reproduce more silk to patch it up. And like I said, this is your most of your garden spiders you find. Another common web identification is the technical term is tangled webs, but we call them cobwebs. And they're from the family, I can't even pronounce that word. Theridiidae, I don't know. Ryan Stead was great with Latin phrases, but not me. They're more messy and shapeless. They really don't have a design aspect in this the sense. This is your common house spider, your widows. So if you look at it, it's messy, it goes all over the place, but it's done with the purpose. The intentional design is once the insect falls into that trap or into that web, the more it moves, the more it gets entangled. So it's less work for the spider to go in and capture it. Whereas orb weavers, they have these beautiful net webs, And if a fly or an insect flies in, they could actually get away if the strings are not sticky enough, or if there's enough wide space, they could fly away. So the actual spider has to be in close proximity to capture it, and they have to be fast about it. But these entangled webs, these cobwebs, are so easy to, the more you move, the more entangled you get. And so it's really easy for your common house spider or widow to spend less energy and then just focus more on eating them later. And then you also have your woolly webs. And this may be a little confusing and thought of as your cobwebs. This is the family Discidae or Discidae, and they're almost like cobwebs, but they're more sticky. And so if you're in your attic or your basement and you ever walk out and you're just trying to take it off of you for the life of you and you just can't, that's probably a woolly web in that family. And so the silk is very adhesive, and and it's not so much adhesive as far as glue, so it's not sticky. It's more of electrostatic. So again, so if you think of like your dryer sheets from, you know, when you're doing your laundry, your clothes get sticky, and that electrostatic happens. That's what's happening here with these woolly webs. They stick onto you because of that, and the nanofibers behind that, but not so much because of the texture or the stickiness of it. And some orb weavers will use this silk as well. So a lot of it, I don't know if you've seen this, but I've seen these types of webs, especially at headquarters in the hedges. So you'll find these sheet webs mostly in like hedges, grasses, shrubs, and they're concave, and they lay horizontal, and they're basically deadly hammocks. So what happens is the spider will create these strings above, and they're super sturdy. So they're almost like drag lines, and there's no stickiness to them. And they'll produce those lines for a purpose. What they're hoping is insects will fly into those strings and get knocked out, and then they'll fall into the net beneath them and get stuck. And that's how they actually figure out how to catch their prey that way. So again, it just depends on that, but most of the spiders that use this tactic would be from the family Discidae. Next one is funnel webs. So this is interesting because I had an interaction with a visitor at Satwewa one day, and I don't know who was talking to her. I think it was another visitor, and they're like, "Oh, look at the funnel web," and she was definitely terrified. She was from Australia, and she came in and she's like, "You have funnel webs, or you have funnel spiders?" And I was like, "Oh no, we don't." I go, "We have spiders that create funnel webs, and in Australia they're deadly. The funnel spiders are super deadly." And so she thought automatically we had them here because somebody called them the funnel web spider. What she didn't understand was it's a grass spider that creates a funnel web. So we had this long discussion about that, and she was teaching me about these deadly Australian funnel spiders. They do create their funnel webs. They have anchor points, and then the type of silk they use is in the front face of it is very springy, so it's very elastic. And then what they'll do is they'll hide on the inner side of the funnel. And the reason why they make it so springy is it's easier for them to detect insects crawling on the outside, and their tactic is more ambush. So they'll run out and grab their prey and envenomate them that way. And I've seen it once with I was with I think it was Ranger Ken. He was demonstrating, so he got like a little piece of grass and very lightly just teased the end of the funnel, and the little guy ran out, but then saw nobody was there and he ran back in, but very gently. And so they really rely on that elasticity to sense vibrations and sense the insects outside. If you do it too rough, they don't come out. They're very sensitive to light, so it's really hard to sneak up on these little guys. And they have really good eyesight, so you can't really sneak up on them that well. You have to have really good. You have to be very quiet and very still to have them come out. This is really cool to know is the web design. So again, we're going to focus more on orb weavers. And the mooring threads, if you think about, you know, sailing, or if you have a boat, you moor, you anchor it to the side harbor. So that's basically what they're doing here too. They're creating these anchor points. So what they'll do is they'll create these anchor points across foliage or whatever they need, and then what they'll do is they'll create a framework from each anchor point. And once they create that framework, that outer framework, they'll actually go inwards with the framework. So I don't know if you could tell, there's green lines going in. I didn't have time to do the whole web, but they'll do a framework for the entire web going back into the middle of the hub. This thread or this silk is not sticky. It's actually sturdy, and that's because they're just laying down a foundation for their web. And then they'll actually go into the radials, and so, or the red eyes, and they'll bring in that main framework inwards, and then they'll start connecting all of those pieces. And again, the radials are also sturdy. They're not sticky at all, and they're again just creating that foundation. And then they'll go over all those threads, and they'll add the viscid thread, and that's your sticky silk. And then they'll add that on top of that thread or near that thread. And so they'll create their webs that way. And they always start from the outer going inward. And then they'll rest. If it's an orb weaver, it will rest in the hub, in the center point of the actual web. And usually they'll, with their legs, they'll pull in the web and make it taut. So they're actually using a little bit of energy to create this sturdiness of their web. So I have a little video to share. And this one's really neat because we get to watch her do the framework we just talked about. So that was cool. Earlier, they will eat the middle of the hub and replace it with new silk. So we'll replace it with a sticky silk. So yeah, they're getting rid of that framework and then just doing that. So let's see. So I mentioned, am I delayed? Can you hear me? All right, give me a thumbs up if you guys can still hear me. No? A little bit?
You go in and out, so I have a record of a few slides to go over due to audio cutout. So at the end, we'll probably repeat it. So like the first three, your audio got cut out about 50%. And then this slide that you just went over or a little bit before that, it just like completely cut out. You're also on mute.
All right, do you guys want me to go over those slides now or at the end? Hello?
Well, why don't you keep going forward?
Okay. All right, we'll go forward. All right, so you see in the photo here, the stabilimentum or stabilitai is shown here. So this is an audio part of the family. So scientists have been trying to figure out whether or not these little zigzags or spirals are made to attract prey or camouflage themselves to avoid predators. And so two scientists went into it, and they discovered that these orbivores, they're diurnal and they rest in the center, and they're trying to figure out how does this affect them and the stellar momentum. So what they found out was they created this study where they went out and they placed various types of species, and this is just a small list. I believe they have almost 60 different types that they were studying to see. And the ones that had, as far as capturing prey, they found out that the ones that had no momentum caught more, whereas the ones that did actually caught less. So that piqued their interest. They thought to do the opposite. And so they discussed it and they figured, well, maybe it's to avoid predators. So they went out there with the same framework and methods. And they found out that they're looking more by being damaged by birds, flying through the nets or nicking them. But they tested with spiders and without spiders. And in both cases, the ones that had the submomentum present had less damage to the actual web, and whereas if it did have it present, it was no damage at all. So that was interesting to see, and they're actually furthering their studies on that to figure out what is the behavior behind that for them. They also discovered while they did this was the silk actually reflects with UV light, and they're wondering what are the abilities to that. Why are the insects, are they more attracted to it, or vice versa? So they actually photographed pictures of plants using UV light versus white light. And on the left side are photographs of plants with UV light and those on the right are light. So you can definitely tell the difference in details. There's more detail with the UV light. They can see more spaces in between. There's not much of a fog in the foliage. And so they started taking photographs of spiders with their webs to see if there's the same probability. And so on the top one, 7 and 8, we can see the center of the left one, and that's with UV light. And so you can see that our spaces in between left and right. Whereas the white light, you can't see as much. 9 and 10 is a little bit more difficult to decipher. And that's because Stacy and the way the spider created the web there. But 11 and 12, they look similar, but on the one on the left, you can notice the lines are a little bit more brighter. And so what they discovered was because of the UV light that is what the silk attracts, the insects can actually differentiate. And what they're looking for is space, so they're looking for sky. That's the way they think, that's where they're looking to fly towards. So they're trying to avoid anything in their way. So with if you look at the photo with the plants, like on number 14, you can see this is very white and not a lot you can see in detail. Whereas here, there's more detail. They could actually have this perception of depth and distance. And so they think that is why with webs of spiders that reflect more UV light may attract them, because they see these more open spaces that they think they could fly towards the sky or more space. And that's why they think they could attract more insects. Let's see. Here's another web designer. So this one's interesting. This spider, it's an orb weaver, creates the largest web ever. And scientists are not baffled at the fact that she could create such a web. They're baffled at the fact that she could create so much silk to create this web in one time. So this is a nice little clip. It's about 3 minutes.
Like a real-life spider woman, she sprays strands of silk in one long, continuous flow. The threads fan out like a sail and drift on air currents blowing across the water. Every few seconds, she crimps the strands together to stop them spreading too widely. The breeze will do the rest, blowing the threads into a single line and a 25-meter bridge. Now she must reinforce her bridge because her web will hang from it. But there's something bouncing the line at the other end. Another Darwin spider is trying to take advantage of her hard work. She must deal with the intruder head-on. The cut line is an inconvenience, but no more than that. With hooks on the tips of each leg, she gathers in the thread. It won't go to waste, as she'll eat it later. When it's all reeled in, she sprays again. Out streams another 25-meter bridging line. How a spider no bigger than a thumbnail can produce so much silk so quickly has baffled scientists. And it's no ordinary silk. It's the toughest natural fiber on the planet, tougher than steel. And it needs to be tough to span the wide river. With the bridge taut and the ground anchor in place, it's time to construct her trap. These spiders can build the world's largest orb webs, up to 2 meters wide. A few hours from the first spray of bridging line, the job is done.
All right. Hopefully that worked out. Let's see. So let me go back to the parts you couldn't hear me. Let's see. Do you remember? Let's see. What was the chat?
If you go back to the slide that said web design, as soon as you said that first word at the top, the word
The
that
boring threads?
I can't pronounce that word either. The stab something.
Oh, stabilimentum?
Yeah, it was
Okay.
like at the top of the slide with a little asterisk or a little definition. Right
That
there, this
one?
one. That's where like that whole segment just like cut.
It says it's because I have other apps open. I don't, so I don't know why it's doing that. So I'm wondering if it's because I have my team apps open for do not disturb, but maybe next time I'll make sure to turn that off. Yeah, so the stabilimentum. So this was where scientists thought it was either to, they really thought it was to attract prey. And they'll create these spirals of zigzags around the hub or an X, and even some spiders will just do one line. It really just depends on the actual species. And they thought it was to camouflage, to avoid predators, and with their study, they found out that it was to avoid predators, so birds in particular that they're focusing on, whether birds fly through the net or go towards it. Did you guys get to hear all that part as well, or do I need to go over their study? Lay, you're on mute.
You have to go over the study.
Okay, cool. So what they did find as far as catching prey, they found that spiders that had no stabilimentum, and this is just a small list, the list is up to 80, so I just took a screenshot of just a little bit of it. The ones with no stabilimentum actually caught more rather than less. I mean, caught less rather than more. So apparently having the stabilimentum present actually hurt them as far as catching prey. So that's where they further discussed and figured out, well, what if it's to avoid predators? And like I said, they're more focused on birds flying through the net or flying through the web or going near it. And what they found out, and they tested it with spiders and without spiders present, and they had a whole framework of doing this. And what they found out was when the stabilimentum was present, with or without a spider, it was less likely to be damaged. And so they thought that was interesting, that they're willing to create these extra designs, even though it's going to hurt them in catching prey, but they rather take less prey and spend less time fixing a web. So that was interesting. So that's part of the behavioral study that they did on these guys. So what was the other slide you couldn't catch?
All the way up until you started playing the video, like, so we
Okay.
didn't hear any of this part.
So none of the UV light. Were you guys able to hear all that then?
No.
Okay. So with the UV light, they also, the same scientists discovered that the UV light silk produces, reflects it really highly. And they wanted to see how that affected them in catching prey. And they thought maybe it was to attract them or avoid them. And so what they did was they tested certain objects with UV light and white light. The left side is UV light. And you'll notice the left side, the flowers and the vegetation's a lot more detailed. And the left side is less detailed. It's a little bit more foggy. So that may have affected their perception of depth or space. And they know, because of behavioral science on insects, that they're always flying towards space. They're always looking for the sky. So that's how they avoid objects sometimes. And they did the same thing with their spider webs. So they took photos with UV light and white light. And they saw, especially in 7 and 8, you could see the center point here. There's a little bit more black, and you can see more details rather here. It's a little bit foggy. 9 and 10, it's kind of hard to tell. And 11 and 12, the actual webbing is brighter than the one on 12. But again, the insect is looking for places it can fly through or to. And so this is where they're gonna avoid this patchy white stuff. And I think that's the end because it goes to the video. Yeah. Is there anything else?
So Aaron asked, is the ability to shoot a web 25 meters specific to that one spider?
Yes, I think that spider was in some part of the Amazon or Panama. And they're still trying to study why she makes such a huge web, but and they're still baffled on why so much silk. So they're still studying that part. I don't know if that answers your question. Sorry, Aaron.
One of the questions from earlier is, scrolling, do they eat the web?
So they will, so orb weavers actually can reproduce their webbing every day. So you'll see some garden spiders, they'll put their web, depending on if they're diurnal or nocturnal, but some will produce their web during the day, and then at night they'll take it all down, they'll eat it, and they'll recycle those proteins so they could recreate another one the next day. Is there another one?
I don't see another one in the group chat, but I do have a question for you.
Yes.
So you said there's protein in the web?
There's protein and there's silk. So therefore the material that the silk is made out of is protein. So they'll eat that so they can recycle that protein.
Oh, cool.
Razsa, how often do on average, do the spiders have to eat? Do they have to catch something every day, or?
So depending on species, yes and no. Orb weavers, they found out that some orb weavers can catch up to over 175 insects a day. And so they're eating those 175. And they even found one that could, I think they caught more than 200, but they're small, you know, they're tiny insects or whatnot. So they had to take that into account. Funnels or trapdoors could last a little bit longer. They could eat in intervals of 3 to 5 days, but typically they need to eat something every couple of days to conserve their energy. Because if not, they'll lose that energy to the point where they can't lower their metabolism to fight with colder weather temperatures, or they'll have energy to catch their prey.
And do they, I guess, do they eat everything they catch every day, or will they store some of it?
So I know with spiderlings, the babies, they won't eat anything bigger than them. However, if it's dead, they'll scavenge it later on. So they'll eat a dead cricket throughout a week's worth. But as far as adults, I don't know if they'll scavenge or place them later.
Thanks.
You have another question? Can a spider get stuck in its own web, and can another spider get stuck in another web?
Ooh, good question. So I don't know the exact answer, and I don't want to give you the wrong answer. I would say I don't know at this point. But the way my mind works, I'm thinking obviously the spider in its own web. I've never seen a spider stuck in its own web. And I'm just guessing by the way when I observe them, the way that they have the little hairs at the end of their legs and the way they walk, they avoid that. But that's a good question about if other spiders get stuck in other webs. So I don't know that question. That's a really good, a good one.
Razsa, typically how long would it take to make an orb web, do you think?
So the general ones, the garden spiders, within a few hours. So they could do it within like I said, they'll have their web within a day. So like an hour or so. It really just depends on how big the web is and how much silk they could produce. So again, they're very cognitive and thinking on how much, like they really think about how much silk they can produce to make their project.
Also, I take it the birds are their main predator. Are there other predators? I guess other spiders, but are there other predators?
For sure, birds. There's other larger insects that can prey on them. Human beings, I guess, we're horrible to them, I guess, half the time. With tarantulas, it's the tarantula hawk, and yeah, other bigger spiders, because they're cannibals, so they will eat each other if they have that opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
Razsa, what makes the web sticky? Because as you've shown us, sometimes they'll put out webs that are parts of the web that are just strong, but then I guess they'll change the mixture to then make parts of it sticky. So do you know what makes it sticky?
Yeah, so it's those proteins inside their abdomen. They're basically their own chemists. They could actually chemically manipulate what type of viscosity, flexibility, strength they need for that particular silk. And then they'll produce it, and then they'll start using it as fit. And then, like that video said, that spider took a rest, and they think she rested because she was producing a different type of silk to use.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Hey, Razsa, are there any spiders that don't use webs?
Like webs for like a orb weaver web, you mean?
Yeah, like webs to catch prey.
I would think it's the jumping spider. They will use web to they don't use it for shelter as much, but they'll create a wall, a crevice to help them shelter a little bit. It really just depends. So tarantulas don't use webs as far as, to sit in. They use webbing for other functions. So I don't know, I can't think of one on the top of my head.
And there's, Carrie, is that a question? Is this trapdoor question mark?
Oh yeah, there you go. Yeah, thanks for that, Carrie. Yeah, they'll use the webbing more for the inside of their den. And they'll use it just to create the hinge to their doors. So yeah,
I believe they also put out little
a drag line, right, to sense it.
Right, exactly. Little sensory feelers.
Yeah, so they're more of an ambush tactic like tarantulas. So they'll just lay out the outer part of their den with webbing, and once they feel those vibrations, they'll come out and ambush their prey.
And tarantulas produce silk?
Yeah, they do. So they produce, I don't know how many different types of silk. It depends on the species. I know the Costa Rican zebra, because I had one, they could produce up to 3 or 4 different types of silk. And I was able to witness 2 or maybe 3. She lay down, so what happens with tarantulas, they'll sometimes produce a particular silk to help them molt. And so they'll lay down this light bed of silk on the floor, and then they'll kind of, I don't want to say throw themselves backwards onto it, but they'll lay down with their legs up, and they'll molt that way. So the silk actually helps them stay put as they're taking off their exoskeleton. And tarantulas will also create egg sacs, so they have a particular silk for that. And then they have another silk that I've been having issues with my tarantulas is they'll create this really sticky silk for their prey, but it makes it harder for me to clean out or take out the dead unwanted bodies of crickets in there. So it's really sticky. So it's hard for me to go in there and remove stuff because it sticks to me and I ruin their whole little habitat and they get mad.
Razsa, you may have talked about this before, and I think I've seen programs where like there's some really big spiders, but I can't remember like how big. I mean, like even much bigger than tarantulas out there, I think.
Are you talking about like the huntsman or the like in the Middle East, they have those pictures on the internet where they're like super huge?
Yeah, or I'm thinking like, just seeing programs like, in these like the Amazon jungle or some of those really obscure places where they talk about, I have this vague memory of just, seeing some really big spider, and I'm thinking like, maybe 6 inches long, big.
So, and I know for sure in the Amazon they have like the bird-eating Goliath tarantula, and those guys get big as far as their leg span. They're huge. They're bigger than my face. All right. Anything else?
I think once before you mentioned how many different spider species are there in the Santa Monica Mountains?
Oh, spider species in Samo, I don't know. North America, I think it's around. I get it mixed up. It's either 3,500 or 35,000. I think it's 3,500 for North America.
A lot of species.
A lot of, and so that yeah, they're all over the world except for Antarctica. So if you really want to avoid them, you're gonna have to live in the blistering, freezing cold. All right, somebody put in the chat a little snippet about the wolf spider. While some species weave their silk into distinctly designed webs for ensnaring and holding prey, the wolf spider uses its silk to line its shelter and fabricate its egg sac. So yeah, wolf spiders will do that. A lot of other spiders will do that too. And they added the link, so if anybody wants to see that link, they could follow it. Carrie Perkins says, for now. Any other questions?
I just thought of one, and you may have addressed this before, but how many babies will a spider have typically?
Oh, that's such a good question. Depending on the species, hundreds on the egg sac. I had a black widow, and she was laying egg sacs. And I did rip one just to see what it looked like inside. And there was about, I want to say about 60, 70 in it. And they're just small little pebbles until they hatch. My tarantula had an egg sac, and they can have anywhere between 100 150 inside of an egg sac sometimes. Again, depending on species, so anywhere between 60 to 100 or so. So it's a lot of babies to take care of.
So what's their survival rate? Really low, I assume.
In the wild, very low. Captive, folks are smart about separating them and putting them into vials. But yeah, in the wild, they eat each other. So even if they're in that nursery together and they're being taken care of, they will eat each other. So again, it's the survival of the fittest.
And in a female spider's lifetime, if they say they live out, their full life, how many babies do you think they produce? I mean, is it in the thousands?
You know, it depends on spider species, but black widows could live up to 8 months till almost a year, maybe a little bit more. Mine lived for over a year, but I had her captive. And like I said, within that year and a half that I had her, she laid about 5 different egg sacs. And so multiply that by 60, 70 spiderlings inside, that's a lot. I know the orb weavers, I don't know specific orb weaver, but they could typically live up to a year. And so they could have as many, I think, it really depends, because the female could actually hold on to the sperm that the male gives her, and she'll use it when she wants to. So if she wants to reproduce more often than not likely, she could create egg sacs more often, or if she's not comfortable in her habitat or the weather conditions not favorable for her, she won't produce that egg sac. So it really just depends. It varies. The range varies depending on situations like that.
And actually, that just reminded me, so do they have babies all year long, or is it like deer, you know, they have their babies, you know, starting in spring so that there's lots of food, or is there a time
So it depends on weather. So Santa Monica Mountains, beautiful weather year round. You get a little bit of rain, you get a little bit of that. They can produce year round. But when you get more of that, the seasonal weather, the 4 types of weather, they're going to produce mostly in the springtime. Springtime and summer and September.
There's another question. Do some species of baby spiders eat the mother?
Oh, there is one. Oh, I can't think of the name. The mother will sacrifice herself for it. I can't think of the name right now. I could make that into a program, but I'm sorry, I can't think of the spider that does that.
It'll be a great Mother's Day program.
Right.
Razsa, when you get together with other spider geeks, is it just on the web?
Good one, Rob. It's funny you said that. We do talk a lot through the internet.
Lay just posted the African social velvet spider.
Yes. Thanks for Googling that, Lay. Any other questions?
I don't see any other questions.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. I'm sorry I had a little bit of technical difficulty. I think it was, I had 2 other apps open on my computer, so I'll make sure I turn those off next time, and we'll see you again for the next spider series.
Thank you much.
All right, you take care.
Okay.
Bye.
Thanks,
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks a lot. I think if people knew more about spiders, they'd treat them better.
Oh, most definitely. Most definitely. Thanks for coming out. And